Hi everyone! In today's tutorial I'm going to show you a technique that I call stamp etching, and I'll explain that later in the video. This is the image that we're going to create today. And it's very simple. All you need is a black marker and an image that's stamped in black. Now I'm using a black Stampin' Right Stampin' Up marker, and it has two tips, the fine tip and the brush tip, and we'll be using both of those today. The technique is very simple. What you want to do is set your marker down for just a second on your cardstock and then make a very simple flicking motion. And by flicking motion, I mean that as you quickly make a line and you're moving away from your starting point, you also lift the tip of the marker up off the cardstock. And what this does is create a tapered line that's narrower at the end than it is at your starting point. This gives you a couple of great design advantages. Number one, since I'm working with a botanical image here, it gives it sort of a more organic look than just a straight line that was the same width all the way down. So here it looks a little bit more like the veins in a flower petal. But it also gives just visual interest that every line isn't going to be exactly the same. What I'm doing is I'm adding lines at the base of each petal, and then I'm coming down from the top and I'm doing the same flicking motion back down from the top of the petal towards my lower lines. And I'm deliberately leaving a space in the middle, and that space will give the illusion that this flower is actually three-dimensional when I'm finished. The reason that I decided to call this technique stamp etching is because the actual etching process creates images that have these same types of lines, and there's a reason for that. When artists would create an etching, they would take a sheet of metal and cover it with a wax. Then they would scratch their design into the wax using a very fine needle. And because of the tool that they were using, the fine needle, a lot of what they did involved these very detailed, precise, small lines throughout the design. And so they all had a similar look. You'll notice that woodcuts and some other types of prints have similar looks, and that is because of the tool that they're using. So when I decided to transform this flower just using this one simple tool, a fine-tipped marker, it brought etching to mind, and that's why I called the technique stamp etching. Now I'm going to come back with the brush tip here, and I'm just going to add totally black shading where these petals are folded over on themselves. This gives the illusion that that section of the petal is in shadow, and it also breaks up the design a little bit and lets your eye sort of move around, stop in a few places and not get bored with. This is kind of a repetitive design process, and these black sections really help break that up just a little bit. You could also do this with the fine tip of the marker. I'm just extremely lazy and I like to do it quickly, and so I find that the brush tip really helps me speed it up and not be impatient. The whole process doesn't take very long though. Now another thing that you can do to add just a little bit of variation to your etched stamp projects is you can use different colors. You don't have to use black. I love just crisp black and white, or black and a color, and that's sort of how I invented it, but it certainly doesn't have to stay that way. You could do this entire image in another single color or in multiple colors. I have some sort of aversion to regular graphite pencils. I think they remind me of doing math problems, and so I just don't like them. I like colored pencils better. But I think that if you went back with a pencil or graphite or even a light gray marker and duplicated some of these lines after you had the black ones down, I think that would be really beautiful. So those of you who are at peace with your pencils, feel free to do that and post a comment on my blog. I would love to see what it looks like, and then I won't have to touch a pencil. However, just using the marker you're going to see that you can also add a lot of depth and a lot of shading just by reinforcing some of the lines that you've already drawn. And what's great about just having some random lines is when you go back, like I'm doing here, and just add another row of lines, it really does look random. You're never going to put the line in the same place twice. But if I add, for example, on a petal that's underneath another petal, if I add an extra row of these little fine lines, it really adds so much dimension to the image that I think you'll really like it. So I'll just do that in a few places and fill in the center of the flower a little bit. It's looking a little bit one note there in the middle. So what I did was I just flicked a few lines underneath the center of the flower, just radiating outwards, just to make that center pop a little bit and separate it from the rest of the flower, but not too much work there. And then that's it. Your image is really, it's really finished. And I have a few samples for you. This is what this image looks like finished on a card. I think it would make a great wedding card. It's stunning on Coastal Cabana in black. And then I did some variations like cross-hatching, which I think is beautiful, and it's another popular etching technique. And finally stippling, which is also gorgeous, just little tiny dots with your pen. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching.